We spend a lot of time on MMORPGs on this channel, and why not? They're awesome. But every once in a while, we need to take time to recognize the finely crafted experience that only a single-player game can provide. Games that manage to utilize all the resources at their disposal through gameplay, audio, visual, storytelling, to build up to incredible moments that stick with you long after the game is completed. These are the moments that keep me coming back to video games, and cutting it down to 10 was pretty tough for me. A lot of these are moments that affected me personally, as much because of where I was in life when I experienced them as how incredibly well crafted they are. So as impossible as it is to narrow this down to just 10, how about we just kick off the list and you guys can tell me how wrong it was later. However, fair warning, there will be spoilers for every one of these games. A lot of these favorite moments happen at the very end of the game, so if you intend on playing them, you should probably check out this video later. So let's kick it off with Journey, and not because it's the lowest on this list. I don't think I could order them even if I tried. Journey for me was just awesome. I mean, talk about combining video, audio, and movement to build up to just a perfect moment in gaming. For the first few seconds of the game, movement is slow and plodding, and over time building up to a slightly faster, like little hops, was just fantastic. You can feel the distances and speed at which you can travel slowly increasing. The world itself has seemed to almost hold you back. It's dead and empty with only tiny glimpses of life and movement outside of you, the player. And then suddenly it just explodes around you as you slide down this hill of sand. Sand carpet dolphins are leaping in and out of the sand as you slide at a breakneck pace, the sand looking more and more like crashing waves and like water. It's just incredible. As you majestically slide through the ruins down a flowing river of sand, the music, which has already picked up to increase the excitement, continues to build to this moment as you shift perspectives and look out over this ancient city that almost looks alive as the sun reflects off of every surface in one of the most beautiful sunsets, in my opinion, ever depicted in video games. I have it framed in my room. I love this moment. To make it even more impactful, immediately after, you're plunged into a dark abyss, and that life, that music, even that light, all just cuts out. And all of a sudden you're plodding alone in the darkness. The transition is one of the most impactful moments I've ever had in gaming, and really shows what the medium is capable of. In one of my favorite games of all time, Elder Scrolls Morrowind, that moment was turning the game on. The opening intro music is just outstanding, and then honestly just opening up on the boat with no real background, no understanding of where we came from, was just so mysterious for the time. Emerging from below deck to the wide open world of Morrowind, you can kind of glimpse the vastness that awaits you, but not before immediately having our first conversation with one of the only voice acted characters in the game, that funny little old man screaming, "Ah, yes." I've heard it so many times due to all the times that I've restarted this game. There are a couple of ways we could do this, and the choice is yours. Seriously though, after this you're presented with a wide and interesting class system, and then the game just opens. I mean, it was my first Elder Scrolls or really open world game of any kind, and it just blew me away. I was just totally swept up in the concept that I could go anywhere. Of course, the list about impactful moments in video games wouldn't be complete without at least one reference to a Metal Gear Solid title, which could probably fill out a list from just this series. But for me, one stands out more than any other, and it's the fight against Psycho Mantis. To say this fight dabbles in breaking the fourth wall is an understatement, as he initially reads your memory card, commenting some of the other Konami games you've ever played. For me, it was like, "I see you like Azure Dreams." The screen turns black like the inputs were changed, but with Hideo in the upper left instead of the standard video that was common in TVs from the period. In the fight itself, you're encountering an enemy that seemingly cannot be hit, predicting every shot and deflecting them meaninglessly, all while you steadily continue to get worn down. Eventually, you're driven to a conversation with the Colonel, who suggests that you change controller slots so that he can't read your mind. The hilarious breaking of the fourth wall, and in such a tense moment, and how they mixed gameplay with physical controller layout, like in my room, in the space that I was physically sitting in, was just one of the more unique moments in gaming for me. It truly left you feeling like you had to almost cheat to beat this boss, that he was so strong that you had to manipulate the game world in order to win. It left me feeling like I'd won, but that my opponent was truly a force to be reckoned with. It was just awesome. It was such a cool idea, and I've never seen it again. leading into another game that helped me shape my love of gaming, Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. As a kid, the scope of this game confused the hell out of me, and I remember finishing the first 3 trials, those first dungeons, thinking I'd probably completed most of the game. Heading back to the princess after what I believed was a full game worth of childhood adventures, seeing Zelda fleeing into the night was very confusing for me. Suddenly I felt very alone, with your only hope heading off to the Temple of Time and completing the goal yourself. And what happens? Ganondorf enters the Temple of Time, you're too young to be the hero, and you're locked in space-time for 7 years, and the world is essentially gone to hell when you get out. As a kid, I was like astounded by all of this. The shift in tone, that all of the items I'd been obtaining were unusable in my current form, that we'd essentially like lost, like it was over, we already lost. It was just all mind-blowing. And I'd never even played a game where I got to witness places ravaged by time, areas I just visited, seen in their prime. It was so impactful. And as an adult, I can see how little of the game I'd even touched, and how quickly the beginning section can be completed. But as a kid, it was like being told that a sequel was made for your favorite game and it's out now and you actually already own it and start playing it. It was just so cool, I was so shocked. But sometimes you don't need complex storylines in time travel, with another title brought to us by that game company. What can I say, these guys can really do some amazing visual storytelling. Flower is a game that literally is built on the idea of creating music through 3D movement. It sounds beautiful, it looks beautiful, it feels so relaxing. I mean, this is a game literally to play before falling asleep, to just let the troubles of the world slip away. It's impossible to lose. And then it's not. All of a sudden you encounter these harsh edges of industry with electricity lancing out of your gentle flowers, and it's a feeling of vulnerability like I've never experienced. There is nothing you can do. You cannot fight back. And suddenly these beautiful, powerful flowers that you've been playing as this whole game, feeling invincible, feel incredibly unprotected. It's the core message from the developer, but the gameplay impact for me was just astounding. I've never felt so profoundly upset by such a simple shift in the game. And I have to admit, it definitely made me recycle a little bit more. By now, most gamers have heard of and more likely played Portal and its sequel, but you have to remember that at one point Portal was essentially an add-on to the orange box. I owned it because I wanted Half-Life 2. I started playing and of course just couldn't stop. The dry humor and well-crafted puzzles kept me coming back for more, until I was suddenly inching towards an inevitable death by fire at what I assumed was the end. In an unsurprising turn of events, GLaDOS had turned on me and claimed I was no longer of use to her, despite having successfully completed all of her puzzles. The first time I reached this moment, I accepted it as the end of the game, that my death was just how it was going to end. I honestly expected that to happen the whole time, that she would turn on me and I would just die. But then I did die and it said game over in a very you lost kind of fashion. I was kind of just like, I thought that was it. So I almost walked away from the computer, but I reloaded and I looked around, noticing that some of the walls I'd previously used to complete puzzles were like around the walkway outside of the valid puzzle areas. Surviving that and plunging into the bowels of the facility using the portal gun outside of its intended area, at least in the context of the game as it had been defined up until now, was just so cool. I felt like I was breaking out of the game with like the game power still intact, even though I was obviously still playing. All of this climaxed with an incredible battle, and then that famous song during the credits referencing Half-Life and Black Mesa and that damn cake. I was just blown away by the experience, and it was one I didn't even expect to have. But next on the list is something that might have affected me more than others, partially due to my own context while playing it. This is a case of I'm nearing the end, right? And then continuing to play for another like 3 hours into the early dawn, being like, whoops, I guess there was more than I thought. Assassin's Creed 2 was one of my favorite games in the series. I loved Ezio's character, and the glimpses of what had been going on with Desmond in the present were just so cool. So building through the final moments of the game, we have some incredibly difficult fights and some iconic locations in the real world, such as the Sistine Chapel. Following that, we enter a secret room below for one of the game's final scenes. This is one of those games with a long delivery, carefully shifting between small segments in the present and larger narratives in the past as Ezio. Both characters are interesting and fun to watch, but keep in mind, Ezio was essentially a memory. And also remember that at this point, it's like 4 in the morning now. I'm exhausted, bleary-eyed, a little confused, very tired. And it's at this point that you have a cutscene with a hologram of an ancient being trying to shed some light on the greater threat to the world. And midway through this speech, it turns its face and looks right at the screen and just says, Desmond. This blew my mind. I had chills. Like, what? This ancient thing from a memory of the ancestors of the main character is speaking through that memory directly to his face. Ezio in the past is totally confused. He's like, who's Desmond? What are you talking about? Desmond in the future is like, what the fuck just happened? And I'm sitting there like, what did I just watch? This is way too nuts for me at 4 in the morning. Yeah, it's a silly story element, but it all came together for me in one of the craziest moments in gaming for me personally. Now that moment though wasn't only part of an Assassin's Creed game to affect me, with Black Flag having its own moments of emotional significance. Black Flag honestly didn't do too much for me with the overall Assassin's Creed narrative, but the pirate game it was built around and that story that was told was totally worth it. Throughout the game, you play as Kenway, a pirating man working towards amassing his huge amounts of wealth and then returning to his long-lost love to bring them a better life. But years go by and the journey for riches continues, and throughout you enjoy the company of numerous other pirates, lovable and interesting characters that share in Kenway's adventures. Unfortunately, pirating being the dangerous profession that it is, most perish throughout the story at various points, and in the closing moments of the game, Kenway is reflecting on his pirate island sitting at a table once filled with friends. Being a video game, they briefly all return to their seats, sharing stories and drinks, laughing around the table just like in the good old days. But then reality sets in, and they start to fade one by one, reminding Kenway and the player that all his friends are gone and only he remains. It was one of the most impactful moments in storytelling for me in the whole series. Throughout the game, Kenway never really seems to shift too far from his selfish ways, and this moment just drove it all home. To cap it off, he'd received a letter informing him that he spent too long away. His wife has passed away, and his up until this point unknown daughter is on the way to meet him. He approaches the ship that's docking and that she's arriving on, and you're just hit with that profound impact that this was supposed to be him reuniting with his wife. And it's just like, damn. It was a strong message about Kenway, about his life choices, about, going after what you think you want versus what you actually want. He spent the whole game talking about how he couldn't wait to get back to his wife, and yet spent all that time, that whole lifetime, pirating while she withered away and then eventually died. And it was, it hit me pretty hard. While I said I couldn't quite order these in terms of how strongly they affected me, this last one is a serious contender for number 1, and that game is Crisis Core. Now, Crisis Core was an overall fun prequel in the Final Fantasy VII universe, and without a doubt, it was one of the best games ever released on the PSP. Unfortunately, not a lot of people played it because it was released on the PSP. But throughout, one of the game mechanics was called the Digital Mind Wave, the limit break of this title, and I used it about, a million times without really thinking about what it meant outside of its impact on the battles, until the very end of the game. Now, serious spoilers here, but at the end you find yourself facing off against ultimately insurmountable odds. Thousands of enemy soldiers, just impossible. And anyone who's familiar with the Final Fantasy VII universe knows that Zack, the main character, doesn't get out of this alive, but you've just spent a whole game as this likable character, and it's a bit of a downer, which alone is a hell of an ending. But as you fight more and more against these unending waves, the limit break system starts firing off constantly, each time stopping on a different character. See, in battles, it was a lot like playing slots, and if you lined up 3 of the same or more like characters, you did a special attack of some kind. But now, in this part of the story, it flashes to memories of these characters as you fire off each limit break, and then they disappear from the options on the slot machine, slowly limiting the available limit breaks and memories left. See, for me, I had no idea that the concept of the limit break was tied to memories and thoughts and emotions that were tied to these characters from Zack. I just thought it was a neat little slot machines thing. But as Zack goes through more and more final thoughts of his friends, enemies, loved ones, it finally is down to just Aerith, Zack's girlfriend and beloved character from the series. All of a sudden, it just hit me that this gameplay element, this silly limit break system I'd used a million times, was an actual reflection of Zack's inner thoughts in his last moments of life. When it comes down to it, when literally all is on the table and death is upon him, all he could think about was Aerith, and then it was over. Rarely have I seen gameplay and storytelling combined so well through mechanics alone, and it hit me really hard. I was like, oh my, I was maybe, look, couple of tears were shed. This was an emotional moment for me, and Zack's story and how they told it to me was really tough. I also apparently can't count to 10 because after editing this video and counting them up, I realized there were only 9. Whoops. But honestly, this gives me a great opportunity to mention all the games that I didn't have time to put into this one. That would totally break the top 10 kind of concept. Games like The Last of Us, Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, probably most of the other Final Fantasies. I mean, there have been countless games in my life that have drastically impacted me one way or the other throughout the life of their campaign, and while I wish I could spend time going over all of them, it would defeat the purpose of trying to narrow it down. But I couldn't finish this without mentioning just a couple more. I mean, games like Pokemon, Silent Hill, Metal Gear Solid 4, Shadow of the Colossus, all of these games have that moment where you're like, holy shit, what just happened? So while I could go back and change the title to Top 9 Favorite Game Moments of All Time, the 10th is really a chance to remind everybody that there's no way to narrow this down to 10. What about the time you got nuked in Call of Duty? Picking Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle the first time you put your hands on Pokemon? I mean, seriously, we could go on for days. So let me know what you thought should have been on this list. What do you think of the moments that I specified, and which do you think deserved a spot over maybe some of the things I picked? Or come join in the chat on Twitch on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we can chat about it there. Otherwise, check back Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. As always, guys, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, you should totally think about subscribing. I've got videos coming out twice a week, and if you like this one, there's at least a chance you'll like some of the others that are very similar to this, so live dangerously. Let me know what you guys thought about the video in the comments and other videos you'd like to see. And finally, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Huntin for Games to keep up with all the latest stuff. See ya.